Forward.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to a lecture I've been looking forward to for a long time. This is a very busy period for the Clare Roots Society. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I'd better remind you about our next two events. We have 3 Thursday events in a row. Next week, on the 26th, our very own John Bradley, who you probably all know sitting down at the door, has written a book about the history of the Cathedral in Ennis, and that will be launched across the road in the parish centre, 8 o'clock next Thursday. And on Thursday, the 3rd of December, Mary Hester, Mary here tonight? Yes, I see her hiding down there, she won't even write with me. Mary has done a wonderful book on the history of Lizzie Casey and Ballinacally Parish, and that is being launched 8 o'clock Thursday, the 3rd of December in the Ballinacally Community Centre. All right? And then we take a break for Christmas, no lecture in December, but we're back on Thursday, the 21st of January, with a talk on the history of the O'Connell family by Oliver O'Connell. So we'll tell you more about that by email and the usual channels between now and then. And those of you from the Kilrush area, just to remind you, next Tuesday, the 24th, we have Dr. Joe Power giving a talk about sport and social life in 19th century Clare in the Jockheol in Kilrush, in the Kilrush District Historical Society. Tonight we have Dr. Maurice Gleeson, who I first met several years ago when he talked to the Irish Genealogical Research Society in Dublin. We had a talk, I think, on DNA in the first year or two of the society. It was one of many I went to on the subject, and I was totally bamboozled. And suddenly when I went to Maurice's talk, the light bulbs went off and he made it all so easy and simple. So I hope he's going to do that for most people in the audience today. I'm looking around to see if there are any of our members who are supposed to be my cousins. DNA is great. If there's a tradition in the family that so-and-so is a distant cousin, but you don't know exactly how they're related. It's great for lots of other things. At the end of the talk, there's a bag here of DNA kits. Maurice and myself will help you to take your own DNA swabs if we convince you it's worth doing. We have special prices negotiated for the night. And I should point out the value of submitting your DNA to the DNA databases is a lot more than what you pay, because you create, well, economists, as I once was, would call positive externalities for other people. Your descendants in years to come will be extremely grateful to you for leaving your DNA behind you. The people who are already in the DNA databases trying to find out how such a person might be related to them will be extremely grateful. But another match comes up that they can trace back to the same common ancestor. We're going to try and help you out with a Clare Roots Society project on the Family Tree DNA website, which we had finally got established only just before I came out here this afternoon. Well, that's all the administrative background. The science is going to come from Dr. Maurice Gleeson. He's a medical doctor, he's a psychiatrist, he's an actor, and he's the world's genetic genealogist of the year for 2015, which he was just awarded the other day. So please give a big welcome to Dr. Maurice Gleeson.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here at the Clare Roots Society. It's the first time I've been this far west into Clare. So it's really, really nice. I had a lovely jaunt in the car this afternoon. I'm driving a rented Fiat 500. It's like driving a food mixer. And now I know what a smoothie feels like. I had the pleasure of meeting Paul Gleeson down in Kilrush at the hardware store and seeing some of the wonderful sights of Clare. So it's a great pleasure to be here today. Has anybody here done a DNA test? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, about 10 people. Excellent. And who has been thinking about doing a DNA test? Quite a few other people as well. Excellent. Okay. Well, hopefully by the end of today, I will give you a better idea of what kind of DNA test would be the best one to answer the genealogical questions that you have in your family trees, and also give you an idea of what you can achieve by doing such a test. So, to start off with then, this video will be available on YouTube. You can see that there's my iTunes logo fighting for attention, so I'll just get rid of it. I don't know why it's there, but let's just get rid of it like that and then go back to the presentation. Excellent. This is available on YouTube, or will be available on YouTube. I have several similar presentations, but this one is particularly tailored for a Clare audience, okay? And we're recording it on my computer, and also the Clare Roots Society has their own audio recording of it as well. You can just Google YouTube DNA and family tree research, and you'll find it up there. It'll be one of the more recent presentations. Now, this is my family tree. Here I am here, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on. This is a typical Irish family tree. You get back to about 1800, and then suddenly you're running out of records, and you can only find about half of your ancestors at that point in time. And this is after exhausting all the usual sources like family lore, like the letters in the attic, the 1901 and 1911 census, Griffin Valuation back in the mid-1800s, and the cancelled books and revision books in the Land Valuation Office thereafter. Very, very useful. We also have birth, marriages and deaths, civil registration starting in about 1864 for Catholics, and 1845 for non-Catholics, and then we have a variety of different church records going back to about the 1800s, but it's very, very patchy, and it varies from place to place. And then there's collaboration with other researchers online on websites like Ancestry, MyHeritage, Genes Reunited, and so on. And the other sources are like the newspapers. The Glasnevin cemetery records are really, really good up in Dublin. And then the 1939 electoral roll is online. So most of these would be free, or you'd have to pay a fee for these records. But after about 1800, or around about 1800, there's this great big brick wall, and we're all stuck there and we cannot get through. How many people have gone into the 1700s and in any line in their family tree? You see, there's only about less than 10 people who've actually managed to do that. Most of us are still stuck in the 1800s. And that's where DNA can really help. It can actually help put you in touch with, these would be your third or fourth cousins, who might have information, for example, the family Bible, that would allow you to break through that particular brick wall in your family tree. I've done it for my Spearin line. The Spearins were a family from Limerick, and I've managed to go back into the 1600s in Limerick, the 1500s in London, and there's a possibility of going back to the 1400s in Flanders. So even if DNA doesn't provide 100% definitive answer, it certainly shows you what direction your research should be going. So there are a variety of different DNA companies, and the three major ones are really Family Tree DNA, 23andMe, and Ancestry DNA. Ireland's DNA, Britain's DNA, Scotland's DNA is run over in the UK. It tends to be a bit overpriced, as you can see here from these prices that I lifted off the web last night. €300 for this particular package. You have €169 for 23andMe. That gives you a medical risk assessment of about 40 conditions as well. Then the Ancestry one is about €142, but then postage and packaging on top of that, and an annual fee if you want to see your matches. But the one that I promote primarily is the Family Tree DNA one. The equivalent, the most common one is the Family Finder for €84. It's actually €79 tonight, so they brought the price down for this particular event, valid until November the 27th. And there's the mitochondrial and the YDNA test there. So Family Tree DNA, I think, offers the lowest prices. They also have the best infrastructure for genealogists to do their own DNA research. And I'll take you through a little bit of that. So the DNA testing that we're going to do after the presentation, and I have about 50 kits here as well, so either we can swab you here tonight, or if you want to take it away, we can organise for that to happen as well. If you have a relative that you'd like to swab, then we can give you a take-away kit. But the YDNA looks at the father's 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 line, and that's very, very good for surname research, and that's selling at €122. The mitochondrial DNA looks at the mother's line, and that's €65, not very useful from a genealogical point of view, as we'll see. And then the autosomal DNA, which looks at all of your ancestral lines, that's available for €79. So that's €84.79. So we'll look at that at the end of the presentation. But what can you get from a DNA test? Well, there's several things. A community of avid genetic genealogists who are formulated into the International Society of Genetic Genealogy, ISOG, deep ancestry and human migration pathways. It's very, very useful for studying human migration along with linguistic and archaeological data, but not of incredible interest for family historians. It can tell you your ethnic makeup. Most people here will be Irish, so there's nothing new there. But in America, where there's a large mix of different people, it can be extremely useful. It'll put you in touch with long-lost cousins. It will tell you what % Neanderthal you are, if you're interested. It's about 2.6% for everybody in this room. And then medical risk assessment for the 23andMe test. But this is the ISOG website, the International Society of Genetic Genealogy. Everybody here should join this organization. It's just a free society, there's no charge. It has wonderful resources like mailing lists, this website. It also has a Facebook page, which you can search for on Facebook, which has over 6,000 members now, and that's a great source for asking questions and getting your answers to those conundrums. And there's also a wiki page, which is really kind of like a dictionary or an encyclopedia of everything you want to know about DNA. So there's a lot of support there. It's a very, very active community. And of course, if anybody here takes a DNA test tonight, because it's such a young science, you actually are participating, you're on the crest of the wave of scientific discovery. So it's a very exciting thing to do, as well as a very informative thing to do. There are a variety of projects that you can join. These are surname projects that Family Tree DNA has created the infrastructure for. And does anybody see their surname up there? Anybody see their surname there? Because if you did, you could contact the administrator of the project and you would be possibly qualify for a free DNA test. So the administrators of these projects, they're all volunteers like myself, and they are so enthusiastic about attracting people into their surname studies that they are offering free DNA tests as well. So I think we have a free test for Jim Halloran as well, don't we? Yeah, Jim Halloran just contacted us yesterday and said he would sponsor 2 tests, and we have 1. Are there any Hallorans in the audience? Just 1 or 2? Oh, right, okay. Well, you might qualify for a free DNA test, so do come up and see us afterwards. What is actually involved in doing a DNA test? Well, it's a simple cheek swab. And here's somebody swabbing their cheek. Some of the companies require a sample of saliva. Either way, it goes into a test tube. That goes into the envelope. It gets sent off to the lab in Texas. And in the lab, they analyze your sample, put it through the machine, and out come the results. And they post those results on your own personal web page with your own password and your own KIT number. So it's secure and it's private to you. And not only that, but they compare your results with everybody else's in the database. And they post a list of all your matches on your web page. Because most people who do these tests, they want to find cousins, so they put their contact details or tick the box that says, yes, you can share my contact details with everybody else in the database. So now, for example, on the Family Finder test, I have 600 matches, 600 potential cousins. But the other great thing that Family Tree DNA does is it allows you to start your own project. So, for example, there are over 8,000 surname projects at Family Tree DNA, and a lot of them are Irish, and I'll show you a few of them later on. So, let's take a closer look at this DNA that you've swabbed off the inside of your cheek. And by swabbing, you dislodge some of those cheek cells, and those cheek cells end up in the test tube. And this is what a cheek cell looks like. Here's the cell membrane on the outside. Here's the big nucleus in the middle. These little blue things here, they're called mitochondria. And those are like the batteries within the cell, and they have their own DNA, and that's what it looks like. It's circular DNA, and you've got thousands and thousands of copies, well, hundreds and hundreds of copies of mitochondria in your cells. It's very, very useful for ancient DNA analysis, and we'll take a look at that in a while. In the nucleus of the cell, you have your chromosomes, and you'll have heard of chromosomes. In humans, we have 46 chromosomes arranged into 23 pairs. And here are the 23 pairs here. The last pair down here they're known as the sex chromosomes, or X and Y in a man, X and X in a woman. So here we have X and X, and a woman is the result. If you have X and Y, then a man is the result. And we're going to take a closer look at these three main types of DNA tests. The YDNA is only passed on from father to son. So it goes from father to son, to son, to son, to son, virtually unchanged with each generation. And for that reason, it's very, very useful for researching the direct male line all the way back, and it takes us back into Africa over 200,000 years ago, maybe up as far as 338,000 years ago. On the other side of your family tree, you have your mother's 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 line, and that can be assessed by mitochondrial DNA. And that can take us back again to Africa about 200,000 years ago or so. And then in the middle, we have autosomal DNA that looks at all of your ancestors, but it has a much more limited reach. This only goes back about 5, 6, 7 generations, and after that it's so dilute, it really doesn't tell you anything beyond that. So, on the extremes of your family tree, the YDNA and the mitochondrial DNA are good for deep as well as recent ancestry, and the autosomal DNA in the middle is only good for recent ancestry, but it does cover all of your ancestors, whereas the YDNA and the mitochondrial DNA only cover one ancestral line on one side of the tree and one ancestral line on the other side of the tree. So, let's look at YDNA first, your father, father, father. And here is your average Y chromosome, and we have a short arm up here, a long arm down here, a variety of genes along the chromosome, and a variety of markers. These are the typical male genes, like channel flipping, inability to see or hear the obvious, catching and throwing, very male characteristic, ability to remember and tell jokes. These are the kind of characteristics that you see on the male chromosome. But my favorite is the DC10, the ability to identify aircraft. That is just so useful. So that is jokey, but that is what a chromosome actually does look like. And these are the results that you'll get. Here are the markers on the Y chromosome, and these are the values for each of those markers. In and of themselves, they really don't tell you anything. What they will tell you, perhaps, is what haplogroup you belong to, and this one is haplogroup RM269, and a haplogroup is really just a group of people with a similar genetic signature, broadly similar genetic signature. And that's all that the results will tell you when you just have them on their own. The real value comes when you start comparing your results with other people's. And the haplogroups and the SNP testing can be very useful for studying human migration, as we've seen. This is actually the mitochondrial DNA rather than the YDNA, but you get a very similar picture with YDNA, and by using both Y and mitochondrial DNA, you can actually plot the movement of human beings across the planet since the last great exodus out of Africa about 50,000 years ago. There were several failed exoduses before that, but the humans outside of Africa died out. We are the product of the last great exodus out of Africa 50,000 years ago or so. The other great thing that you can do with YDNA is recent ancestry, of course, and I mentioned the surname studies. If you want to find out if your surname is already part of a project, what you can do is you can go to the Family Tree DNA website, and then in their search bar, just type in your name. Alternatively, and I find this even easier, you just Google FTDNA and your surname, and that will tell you whether or not there actually is an existing project for your particular surname. If there isn't, then you can start one yourself. Because that's how we all started. We didn't know what we were doing. We had some basic information, but if you want to start your own project, there is an army of genetic genealogists out there on Facebook, on mailing lists. They'll actually help answer your questions and get you started too. Here's an example of some surname projects that may be relevant to Clare. We have the OBrien Surname Project, which has over 440 members, including, and Paddy, correct me if I'm wrong, Conor O'Brien, the present Lord Inchiquin, who matches a big group of people within the OBrien Project. If you are an O'Brien and you do your DNA test and you match Conor O'Brien, it means that you are descended from Brian Boru, because Conor O'Brien has a direct paper trail all the way back to Brian Boru. So that's the beauty of doing a DNA test. Your own O'Brien family might stop about 1800, but a DNA would show you are a close or an exact match to people in the project who go back with a paper trail to Brian Boru. So that's a very, very exciting additional piece of information for your family tree. We also have the Egan Project. We also have the McNamara Project, the McMahon Project, the Talty Project, the Hogan Surname, and the Halloran Project as well. These are just a few of the projects that are currently up and running. Does anybody have those surnames? Anybody in the audience have those surnames? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Excellent. Okay. So if you did a YDNA test and joined these projects, you'd see which people within the project you matched, and it would tell you a lot about your own particular family's origins. Now, I'll give you an example of the Gleeson Project. And I have 120 members in this project. I'm one of the co-administrators. It was started 8 years ago by Judy Gleeson, and Judy Klassen Gleeson, and then she invited me to join to look after the Irish genetic groups earlier this year. And we also have a blog, and I do occasional articles here of relevance to the Gleeson surname and keep people informed of the progression of the project. And we also have a Facebook page, and that's a great place for sharing information and for collaborating with other Gleesons. Now, a lot of surname projects will have the same kind of structure. There'll be a blog or a website, as well as the family tree DNA pages that we'll have a look at as well. So, on our family tree DNA pages, we post the lineages of all of the Gleesons, and here you can see lineage 3, which is the Clare Gleesons. And I know Paul is descended from one of these people here. Does anybody else have Gleeson ancestry from Clare? No? But you'll see that typically, you know, the brick wall is 1831, 1830, 1825, 1812, and all of them come from around the Coor or Connolly area. So we encourage all the people who join the project to share their pedigrees so that people who come along and match them can then collaborate to try and find out where is the common ancestor. And it's quite likely that these people here, these most distant known ancestors here, some of them are either brothers or first cousins, maybe second cousins. So that's where we currently are with lineage 3 in the Gleeson Project. And these are the DNA results. So this is what the results page of a surname project looks like. You don't need to see the detail, but if you imagine these are all the members stacked up on top of each other. Here are their Y chromosomes in a stack. And across the top are the various DNA markers, and then in each of these columns are the values for each of these markers. Note the distinctive pattern of lineage 1, and it's completely different from lineage 2. Two completely different distinctive patterns. And if we add in lineage 3, the Clare Gleesons, then you'll see that again there's a completely different distinctive pattern. And it just goes to show that the members of these different groups all have broadly the same genetic signature, but each group is very different from each other group. And that's how we can allocate people to groups, by looking at their genetic signature and to see who else or what other groups within the project they most closely match. Now I said lineage 3 was the Clare Gleesons, lineage 2 is the North Tipperary Gleesons. So you'll see that they are completely different genetic signatures. And lineage 1 are the English Gleesons. Now, this particular group has a paper trail that goes back to Thomas Gleeson, born in 1609 in Suffolk, in England. And this is a big surprise, because I would never have guessed that there were any English Gleesons. But this particular lineage is actually originates in England. And this chap went over to New England, Connecticut, in the early 1600s, and he was so prolific that there are Gleeson descendants in New England today who are not Irish at all. They are actually English, and they all derive from this one particular ancestor. And they spell the name Gleason, and that may very well be why a lot of the Irish Glees, Son, when they went over to America, it was changed to Glea, because that's the form the Americans were used to when the Irish arrived. The other great thing that you can do with that DNA data is create this family tree for all of the Gleesons in the project. So we've assigned numbers to each of the project members, and by looking at the mutations that they have in their markers, we can estimate how closely they are related. And this group over here, their common ancestor, their branching point is about 3 generations back, 3 generations back there. This one is about 5 or 6 generations back. This one here is 9.5, 12, 13, 9, and so on. This one here is very exciting because it goes all the way back 21 generations ago. And the reason for that is this particular individual who just joined a couple of months ago is not a Gleeson, he's a Gleeson. Glisson. Now, there's Gleeson in McLysagh's description of the Gleeson surname, and Gleeson surname dictionaries are very, very useful for getting an idea of where your family came from. But he says that they've been given many spellings: Gleeson, 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 Glasane, and so on. And I looked in the phone book today. How many Gleesons do you think there are still living in Ireland? There's only one, and she's in Cork. In 1901 and the 1911 census, there are no Gleesons whatsoever. In the Griffin Valuation from the 1850s, there are 4 Gleesons. So I think what we've stumbled upon here is actually a very ancient branch of the Gleeson family. And what we've been able to do is we've been able to prove genetically that a surname variant that has not been present in Ireland for many, many centuries is associated genetically with the Gleeson surname. So that's a very interesting development. Now, the other thing that we can do with our DNA is do further SNP testing. It's a different kind of test, but that takes us back even further, beyond the formation of the Gleeson surname, and it helps us look at our neighbours. So, for example, the Gleesons have an association with a branch of the O'Carrolls and a branch of the McMahons. And that would have been maybe somewhere between 500 and 1000 AD. And before that, Phelps, Prendergast, Bell, and McCarthy. And before that, Tracy, Miller, McConnell, McCarthy, and Creamer. So you can see that the McCarthys feature quite strongly in the earlier developmental days of the Gleeson clan. And this is going back to maybe 2000 BC, this particular SNP marker here. So this is a very exciting development of DNA, and ultimately what's going to happen is that these SNP markers will be associated with specific surnames, and those surnames are actually being found now in the ancient annals, the ancient genealogies. So I'm quite confident that in a few years' time, you'll do a DNA test and it actually will connect you with some of the ancient genealogies in the ancient annals that we have. And Ireland has the oldest genealogies in Europe, because we started inheritable surnames around about 900 AD, and they came into common usage fairly quickly after that. So even though we might be missing a lot of the more recent centuries, a DNA test might be able to link us up with the ancient annals in due course. It's happening in some surname projects. So if you do a DNA test, then you should definitely join a variety of different projects other than your surname project. Haplogroup projects, they help define the smaller branches of the human evolutionary tree, and subgroups may eventually be associated with specific clans, tribes, and ethnic groups. You should also join the OR1B and subclades because it signposts to smaller projects. My Gleesons are in ORZ255, the L226 are the Dalcassians, the Brian Boru descendants. So there's a variety of different projects that you can join, and the project administrators are a great source of advice and support. For people here, I would advise them to join the Ireland YDNA project and the Munster Irish project, run by Nigel McCarthy, Elizabeth O'Donoghue Ross, and Finbar O'Mahony, because they are superb project administrators, and they've done some excellent work on the DNA of the people of Munster. So these are some projects that you can join, completely free to join. And then there's some special projects, heritage projects, like the Scottish Prisoners Project, which is a very interesting one, because Cromwell sent 2,000 or about 1,000 Scottish prisoners across to the West Indies, which at that stage included Virginia, Maryland, and Connecticut. And as well, he sent thousands of Irish over to the West Indies as well. The big difference here is we actually have documentary evidence of the Scottish arriving in New England on a variety of boats. And this particular project is tracing the descendants of those people in America today. So there's some really exciting projects going on. So is a YDNA test the best test for you? Well, it will help assess your deep ancestry, show you the human migration path of your ancestors, and will assign you to a particular haplogroup. It may eventually link up to the ancient annals. It's useful for confirming a relationship between two men on their direct male lines, father, father, father. There are over 8,000 surname projects on family tree DNA, can tell you which branch you belong to. The geographic projects help elucidate the relationship of your surname to others in the same area, like the Munster Irish Project, and the haplogroup projects tell you what snippet to test next. Heritage projects can be useful, and the project admins a great source of advice and support. And they're available for €122 this evening. So that's YDNA. Now, moving on to the next type of DNA, we've got mitochondrial DNA, and this traces your mother's 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 line. And to illustrate how effective this is, I'd like to tell you about the king in the car park, otherwise known as Richard III, the Hunchback King. And it's a wonderful story because it's so British, it's bizarre. It's really, really quirky, but a wonderful story. And it all started in 1485 when Richard III was killed at the Battle of Bosworth. And his rivals, Henry VIII and the Tudors, probably gave him a lot of bad press to justify their stealing the throne. And for a long time, Philippa Langley, who runs the Richard III Society, felt that this monarch had been much maligned and were out to try to recover his good reputation. So they looked at old maps of where he was supposedly buried in Greyfriars Abbey, and they realized that everybody else had been looking in Blackfriars Abbey, which is why they'd never found the body. And they superimposed modern maps on top of the old ones and found that Greyfriars Abbey had now been replaced by the car park of Leicester Social Services Department. So they went along to Leicester Social Services Department and said, "Would you mind awfully if we dug up your car park?" And they said, "No way." And they said, "We have £10,000. And they said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" So they dug up the car park, and within, I think it was the first day that they started digging, they actually found bones. And this was like, sent a shiver up their spine. I thought, no, this is ridiculous, it can't be possible. And they did a little bit more excavating, and the person excavating said, oh, hold on, it's probably two bodies instead of one body because the head is much higher than the rest, so no, it's probably a false alarm. And then she did a bit more digging, and then she said, actually, it is just one body, but the reason why it appears at different levels is because there's a twist in the spine. And everybody went, no, it can't be. And there's a great documentary on Channel 4 about this, and they go from incredulity to, oh my gosh, as the evidence mounts up. And they found that this particular body was buried in just the part of the church that you'd expect royalty to be buried. They also looked at the bones when they had excavated them and found that there were battle injuries on the bones. There was even a humiliation wound on the pelvis. And they looked at the density of the bones, and they found that there was a very high mineral content in the bones, which would have been in keeping with somebody who ate a lot of fish, and the royals ate a lot of fish because paupers did not. They also found a descendant of Richard III, and they asked for a DNA sample. And here is Michael Ibsen giving that DNA sample. And they also reconstructed the face from the skull that they found. Interestingly, this skeleton had no feet, because in Victorian times, they dug up part of that particular place and had cut off the feet, but had left the rest of the body. So the Victorians came that close to destroying the evidence for Richard III. And here is the lineage of Richard III, and I'll just read this out because it really emphasizes the mother's line. Richard III had mitochondrial DNA, which he got from his mother, but men don't pass on the mitochondrial DNA. It stops with them. It's only women can pass on mitochondrial DNA. So your mother would have passed on mitochondrial DNA to all of her sons, all of her daughters, but it's only her daughters that would have passed the mitochondrial DNA on to their children. So that's why it goes back along the mother's line. But anytime it hits a son coming down, that's the end of that particular line for mitochondrial DNA. So what we did with Richard was, we looked at his mother, from whom he received his mitochondrial DNA, and then went to his sister, who also received mitochondrial DNA from his mother, and that was Anne of York, and then she gave it to her daughter Anne St. Ledger, and then she gave it to her daughter Catherine, daughter Barbara, daughter Margaret, Barbara, very imaginative, this family. Barbara, Anne, she was a lucky one, Charlotte, Muriel, Joy, and Michael. And of course there it would have ended, because Michael was the male, and that's where the mitochondrial DNA would have ended. So they were lucky enough to catch him. And the unbroken female line from Richard III's mother to Michael Ibsen showed that a match on the DNA test was only one piece of evidence. It was positive, it came back positive. He was a very close match to Richard III. But of course, the DNA is just one piece of evidence. It's the totality of the evidence that tells us that in all probability, and they calculated this to be something like 99.9993% probable that these remains were those of Richard III, which is why they then asked the scientists to give back all the samples, clean out all the test tubes, so they could put all of the remains into a coffin, and that coffin was buried in Leicester Cathedral during the summer. So it's a wonderful story, but it just goes to illustrate how useful the mitochondrial DNA is, especially for ancient DNA like this. So it will tell you your deep ancestry, what haplogroup you belong to. From the point of view of family history, it's useful for confirming a relationship between two people on their direct female lines. So for example, if you have a great-great-great-grandmother and you think her sister was this particular person, if you go back along to your great-great-great-grandmother on a direct female line, and the other person that you think this person is connected to also does the same, a direct female line all the way back, and the two are matching, then it lends support to the idea that these two women 300 years ago, 200 years ago, were actually sisters. And that's available for €65 today. The last type of DNA is the autosomal DNA, and that looks at everything in the middle, not just the one on your father's 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 side, not just the one on your mother's 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 side. It's very important to remember that you have all of these ancestral lines in between. So, does anybody know, well, this is Professor Henry Louis Gates. Has anybody seen his show on the television, Finding Your Roots? Anybody? One person? It's absolutely fantastic because it mixes traditional genealogy research with genetic genealogy research. Well, he did his DNA, and his YDNA came back as haplogroup or M222, also known as Nile of the Nine Hostages. So what is an African American doing with Nile of the Nine Hostages? Well, this is a vestige of slavery, because a lot of African Americans will actually, their father line will go back to a European man. About 35% of them will actually go back to a European man. Also because there's a degree of mixing of the races in America since the end of slavery, that also accounts for some of that figure as well. So he said, okay, I was hoping to go back to Africa on that side, let me try my mother's 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 side. He came back with European mitochondrial DNA. So he came over to Dublin, met up with Professor Dan Bradley from Trinity, and they both came to the conclusion that his mother's mother's mother line probably ends with an Irish indentured servant sometime in America several hundred years ago. Well, clearly he's African American, so his autosomal DNA would be largely African. But if you just test one line of your family on one side and one line of your family on the other side, you probably are missing out a huge amount of ancestral information in between. So what I've done is I have tested both myself, my dad and my aunt, and I've uploaded all of our data to GetMatch, which is a free website, and it allows you to compare your DNA with people who've uploaded their DNA, some of them from other companies as well. So even though you're testing with one company, you can also compare your data with the other two major companies if people from those databases have uploaded their data to GetMatch. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And when you do the DNA test, there's a lot of information or a lot of help to actually get you sorted out and help you upload your data to these free websites that are available. So again, my family tree, I tested autosomal DNA. It goes back about 5 to 6 generations to about 1765, but then testing my father brought me back an extra generation, potentially, and testing my maternal aunt again brought me back an extra generation, potentially. Now, most of the time when you do this, it's a fishing trip. I've also done targeted testing where I suspected I had cousins in Australia. I got them to test. My dad had already tested. I thought they might come back as second cousins, and the DNA was bang on, and it came back as second cousins. So you can actually do targeted testing where you suspect that your crowd is related to some other crowd, and you get a volunteer from both crowds to do the test. And if you are related, it comes back with a match. This will go back, like I say, about 5 to 6 to 7 generations. You have a 99% chance of detecting a first cousin or a second cousin, if that is indeed the relationship. You've got a 90% chance of detecting a third cousin. You've got a 50% chance of detecting a fourth cousin, and you've got a 10% chance of detecting a fifth cousin. So you see, the more distant the relationship, the more dilute the DNA is going to be, and the lower your chances of actually establishing a connection. And that's the reason why it's best to test the older generations as much as possible. And those are the 3 companies that do this type of testing with Family Tree DNA on your own private web page. And here's my, this is my one actually. You can see that here's a list of my matches. This person's called Hare, this one's called Haddon, this one's called Spearin, Swords, Maguire, and it tells me the estimated relationship, second to fourth cousin, and so on. And it also shows me the amount of DNA shared with these people expressed in centimorgans. So that's 104, that's 61, that's 66, and so on. And these people have included lists of ancestral surnames. So if you click on that, it brings up a list of that particular person's ancestors. And you can look through that list, and if you're an O'Brien and you're interested in looking for O'Briens, look through all of your match's ancestral surname list to see if the name O'Brien comes up. And then you can think, I think I know which side of the family I'm related. Now, the secrets of success are to have an online tree with names and locations, to collaborate with people, one-to-one, and also in small groups, and to use DNA as a pointer, because that's all it is, really. It doesn't provide you with the answer, it just says, you should look here. And it's very, very good for pointing you in the right direction and helping to guide your research. But ultimately, you will have to go back to the records, to your own family histories, your oral histories, and so on, to actually see if you can establish where the connection is. And just to give you an example of how this process occurs, I helped this 75-year-old lady earlier this year. I call her Jenny here, but actually her name is Winnie. I'm going to show you a video where you'll see that she's called Winnie. And she said that she'd been raised with 75 kids. She was 75 years old. She was raised with 9 kids, but she always felt different because she knew she was adopted. And she had been searching for the last 35 years for her birth family, and she had waited until her adopted mum had passed away before she started that research. And this is something that a lot of adoptees actually do. They wait for the adoptive parents to pass away because they don't want to embarrass them or to insult them or offend them in any way. She found that the non-identifying information she was given about her birth was completely incorrect. And she had tested with family tree DNA in 2010, 5 years ago, and she had lots of distant matches, third, fourth, fifth cousins, but they didn't know how they were connected to her, she didn't know how they were connected to them, and it was just too technical, and she hadn't got anywhere with them. So she contacted me, and I basically said, test with the other 2 major companies, 23andMe and Ancestry, and 6 weeks later she wrote to me and she said, you won't believe this, I've got a first cousin match on Ancestry. And I said, oh wow, that's fantastic. Well listen, this is very delicate. Write them a nice letter. Don't come across too forward. And she said, oh, we're already chatting on Facebook. And we've swapped photos, and the family resemblance is amazing. And but I don't think he's my first cousin. I said, why do you not think that? Well, I'm 75 and he's 35. So I think he's probably the son of my first cousin. So I thought, well, yeah, that probably makes sense. That's quite a large age difference for first cousins. But send me the results anyway, and I'll have a look at them and see if I can find anything else there. And, of course, at this stage, all we knew was that Jenny had found a potential first cousin. We didn't know it was on her father's side of the family or her mother's side. So it could have been on her father's side, it could have been on her mother's side. We didn't know. And the young man's name was Nathaniel, but I'm calling him David here. So she sent me the details, and because of the age difference, we thought it was first cousin once removed, so the son of the first cousin. She sent me the details, and what we were expecting for a first cousin once removed would be about 6.25% of DNA should be shared between them. And there are ranges for that, and the observed ranges we see for first cousins once removed are 3.3 to 8.5%. So this is what I was expecting to see. But I got the results, and they weren't first cousins once removed at all. In fact, they shared 9.77% of their DNA in common, which is above the upper limit you would expect for first cousins once removed. And then it suddenly hit me. She hadn't found the son of her first cousin. She found the son of her half-sibling. It was actually a generation closer than what she had anticipated. We still didn't know if it was on her father's side or her mother's side. So what we did was we looked at the X DNA. And there was an X DNA match between Jenny and David, between Winnie and Nathaniel. Now, where would David have got his X DNA from? His mother or his father? His mother. So that meant that this person here wasn't his father, it had to be his mother. So we narrowed it down on one side of their families. The other thing we looked at was mitochondrial DNA. And now the mitochondrial DNA haplogroup that Winnie belonged to was H11A2, so was Nathaniel's H11A2. But I suppose by chance it could be that Jenny might have received her autosomal DNA from her father and her mitochondrial DNA from her father's first partner. So there was a small chance of that until I actually looked at the number of people in the database that were H11A2, and it was only 6 out of 925 of Jenny's matches, giving a rate of 0.65%. So there was a 93% chance that in fact Jenny was connected to Nathaniel by Nathaniel's mother's mother. And David tested his mother, or Nathaniel tested his mother, and 6 weeks later she said, well, we had to wait for 6 weeks, and Winnie said, I'm on pins and needles awaiting her results. There have been so many disappointments and dead ends in my 35 years of searching, I'm afraid to be too hopeful that his mum is truly my half-sister. The last few days have been such an emotional roller coaster, I think that I have run out of tears of joy. So it was the longest 6 weeks of her life, and it came back as 25%, exactly what you'd expect for a half-sibling. And then she wrote me this email. The last few days have been overwhelmingly wonderful. I've had long conversations with my newly found half-siblings, and we've exchanged more photographs. They say that the resemblance between our shared mother and me is striking. It's just amazing how this family, who a month ago had no idea that I existed, has embraced me with such love and grace, despite having to absorb the shocking news about how we are related. I am so very, very lucky. So that was a wonderful denouement to that particular story. And of course, David had tested in June 2013. He'd been waiting there in the database, waiting to be found for 1.5 years before she actually did the test. But within 6 weeks, Winnie's 40 years of searching was over. And in fact, the company that did the test, 23andMe, they made a video about it, and I'm just going to show you that now. And that doesn't seem to be working with the I'll just try plugging this in and see if it... No, it's not working, unfortunately. And this, I have no idea whether this will work volume-wise, maybe. No. Well, that's a pity, because it is a... Is that coming through? No? Okay. It basically shows how Winnie had gone through all of the documentary data and hadn't found anything at all. And no, that's not working, unfortunately. But she had spent a long time searching, like I say, 40 years, but without any luck. And this particular documentary film crew followed her around as she was preparing to meet her half-siblings, and they had a very emotional reunion, having never seen each other. And she was about, I think she was a good 10 to 15 years older than our half-siblings. But they took the news extremely well, and they embraced her and took her to their hearts. And what this lady is saying, she's the mother of Nathaniel, she's the half-sister. And when her son Nathaniel contacted her and said, "We've got a first cousin match," she said, "Oh no, that can't be true, it's not possible." And Nathaniel says, "Well, no, it's 99.9% probable." So that's when she did the DNA test and came back as a half-sister match. So then Winnie goes off very nervously to meet her new family, and they have a very emotional reunion. So it just kind of illustrates the power of DNA and the fact that it can connect people over the mists of time. So it's a very, very powerful way of helping you in your family history research. And it is well worthwhile doing if you're particularly interested in researching your surname. Then you would go down the father line. If you're interested in connecting with cousins from any of your ancestral lines, then you would do the autosomal DNA test, the family finder test. And here you can see Winnie being greeted at the airport, and it was all great and very emotional. And you can see that on YouTube. I put the link in the presentation so that you can watch that on YouTube. Grand. So, let's stop that. Let's go back there. So, is autosomal DNA testing the best test for you? Well, it will tell you your ethnic makeup, but then that's something you probably guessed already. You're 100% Irish. Well, that's no shock. It's useful for confirming a suspected relationship between any two people. Just get them both to do the autosomal DNA family finder test. It works best with close matches, up to about third cousins or so. I have about 600 matches on Family Finder. Only about 10% of them, that's about 60 matches, are worth pursuing. But hopefully, some of those matches will actually hit the jackpot. And I know that, Paddy, you've had quite a lot of success with that particular test. I think other people in the room might have had similar success as well. It can be complicated. You can get bogged down. Like I say, the secret of success is having an online family tree. And today, they've taken another $5 off, and it's available for €79. Where's my clicker? DNA, of course, has its limitations. It is not a substitute for documentary research. So you still will have to do traditional genealogical research. You will still have to go to those records. The cost has come down considerably in recent years. It used to be up to $1,000 about 10 years ago. Now it's less than 100. A lot of people complain that the results are too technical. It's difficult to understand. The great thing from my point of view is that you can dispense with the technicalities completely because DNA is just a pointer. If the DNA says you and you are related, then you just share your ancestry with each other, your family trees, your ancestral surnames, and see where you might intersect. You can just skip everything else and go straight back to the traditional genealogy. Privacy and data protection are always concerns that people have, and you can do the test completely anonymously, but then that limits your ability to collaborate with other people, of course. There are certain legal implications that you have to be aware of. If you're a millionaire or a billionaire, I probably wouldn't do a DNA test, just to be on the safe side. You can get what's called NPEs, non-paternity events. And when I first heard that, I thought, well, does that mean the father wasn't involved? Well, the father was involved, just not the father you think it was. So these would be things like adoptions, fosterings, illegitimacies, but also things like legal name change. You won't marry my daughter unless you change your name to O'Brien, or you'll only inherit my land if you change your name to Gleeson. That sort of thing did go on a lot. Also, people like Oliver Cromwell, social status. Oliver Cromwell was not a Cromwell. I think he was an Anderson or a Richardson. It's actually his wife was the Cromwell. And she came from a family of higher social status, so he took his wife's name, and therefore all the children were called Cromwell, but their DNA would have been Anderson. In terms of the matches and where they come from, 70% of the family tree DNA database is US, compared to 23andMe with 90%, and Ancestry DNA with about 95%. I get most of my matches with family tree DNA because they have the largest non-US database. And I think that's probably going to be the same experience for most people in the room. Also, the different company databases don't talk to each other, which is why we need public databases like GetMatch to allow us to upload our data to these free public websites and compare it with that from other companies. The most popular tests, back to our past, definitely the Family Finder test. You can say 50% of people bought the Family Finder autosomal DNA test, and then the next most popular test was the YDNA 37 test, which is the starting level for surname research. And of course, if you want to research a surname within your family and you don't have that surname, you don't bear that surname, because, for example, I studied the Spearin surname, but I'm a Gleeson, I had to find a Spearin cousin to volunteer to do the YDNA test. So I went back along his Spearin line, and you can do the same with any of the ancestral lines within your family. And then when we tested in London at Who Do You Think You Are, again, the Family Finder was the most popular test, followed by the YDNA and the mitochondrial in equal measure. So that really concludes everything I wanted to say to you about genetic genealogy and what DNA can do for you, what the best test is. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And like I say, we'll be doing some swabbing at the top of the room for those people that want to try it out. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maurice. Any questions for Maurice? Sure, you have loads of questions down there. I'll come down to you with the mic.
Just a question in relation to Obama when he came to Ireland and he had found his cousin Ollie Hayes in Moneygall and said he was his seventh cousin. Was that the result of a Y test, or how did Obama come across his cousin?
I don't think they used DNA at all, actually. With Obama, it was people like Fiona Fitzsimons from Enetlan who did a lot of paper-based research, and they used those traditional genealogical databases to find his family. So I don't know if Obama has actually done a DNA test. I haven't seen any president's DNA results apart from Thomas Jefferson, because there was a big hoo-ha around about 1800 whether or not he'd had children with his slaves. So as far as I know, he is the only president who has been subjected to DNA testing. Of course, they didn't test Jefferson himself. What they did was they tested the descendants of his grandfather, so all the direct male line descendants of his grandfather. They tested about 5 of them. They tested the direct male line descendants of all of the people who said that they were the sons of Thomas Jefferson and his slave Sally Hemings. And what they found was that some of the descendants, or some of the alleged descendants of Thomas Jefferson, did not match him at all, but some of them did. So it looks like Thomas Jefferson had children with his slave Sally Hemings, but it wasn't the first child, it was subsequent children that he fathered with Sally Hemings. So Jefferson's the only president that has been subjected to DNA testing, as far as I'm aware.
Any other questions? Oh.
The data has been subjected to analysis.
Yeah.
Who does that?
The specific laboratory is Family Tree DNA, and they are based in Texas. They are certified, they have the usual requirements for these type of laboratories. which is held to a very, very high standard. I toured the laboratory myself on Monday in Houston, and they are using state-of-the-art analysis machines, but some mainly from a company called Illumina that is known for making these machines, and some of them cost $10 million each. And they would be industry standard as well. These would be the same kind of machines that are being used by academics doing genetic research as well.
Any others?
I was interested in targeting a cousin which would be about, well, I've gone back about 5 generations.
Right.
And, you know, I think somebody may be about a 5th, 6th cousin. Am I correct in saying, in thinking that there'd be only 10% chance of getting matched?
That's right, yeah. If you're going back that far, 5th or 6th cousin,
then you only have a 10% chance of actually detecting that relationship if it actually exists. If you wanted to increase your chances, you might test several people on your side, several people on their side, in the hope that one of them at least matches. And of course, you'd want to test the oldest member of your particular family branch against the oldest member of their family branch, just so that you have the highest concentration of shared DNA that you can achieve. The other big problem when you get that far back is that we in Ireland, especially if we come from rather small, isolated rural communities, have a habit of marrying our cousins and we don't even know it. My dad calls it socially acceptable inbreeding. And it's just a fact of life, really, that, I mean, for example, my great-grandparents were John Gleeson, who married Anne Gleeson. Now, there was nothing on the baptism or the marriage record to say that there were degrees of consanguinity between them, but I suspect that they were cousins of some sort, but it might be that they were 5th or 6th or 7th cousins. And I think what we're finding as with our DNA results is that we're finding multiple matches on the side of the family that shouldn't be the match. So, for example, my dad's first cousin on his father's side matches him on his father's side, but she also matches a lot of the cousins that are on his mother's side as well. So I think she's probably his paternal first cousin, but maternal 6th cousin as well. So we do have to be careful about that, and you'll know that certainly within your family tree you might have, you know, brother and sister marrying brother and sister, for example. You know, so just because you have a match, you can never be 100% sure that it's on the family line that you suspect it's on. There might be another hidden family line that you haven't researched or haven't gone beyond a certain level where it could also be a connection.
pleasure.
Of course, the other thing on that one is if you have the same surname, the YDNA test will pick up a cousin, a relationship between 6 or 7 cousins who have the same surname, where the autosomal may not pick it up. So it depends. If it's, do these people have the same surname?
Yes.
But then get the YDNA test for a male from each branch. So that will give you a more definitive answer to that particular question than the autosomal test.
Okay.
Yeah.
I may not be correct in this, but from your presentation, it seemed that fairly close relatives, like first cousins or first cousins once removed, seem to have a very low level of commonly shared DNA, something like 3 to 8%. Is that right?
Well, what you'd expect is that you would share 50% of your DNA with your father, 50% with your mother. You'd share 50% with your brother, and 50% with your sister. So siblings share 50%. If you come down a generation, first cousins would share 12.5%. So it comes down 50% on each side, so 25% and then 12.5%. Second cousins would come down by 4 again, so 12 divided by 4 is 3.125. And then third cousins would divide that by 4, 0.78%, and fifth cousins divide that by 4, about 0.2% or so, roughly. So that would be the kind of DNA that you'd share. So for first cousins, it should be 12.5%. I was showing you first cousins once removed. So because it's once removed, you only come down on one of those ancestral lines and therefore divided by 2. So 12.5 divided by 2 is 6.25. So that was what we were expecting to see Jenny and David share, was 6.25% of their DNA because they were first cousins once removed. But in fact, it was 9.77%, which was in the range of half-nephew, which is in fact what Nathaniel turned out to be. But it's a very, very important question, because for a long time, in fact not until this year, had we collected enough information about established degrees of kinship, first cousin, second cousin, third cousin, to actually give an estimate of the actual amount that is observed in reality and the range around that estimate. So you saw there for first cousin once removed, I actually had a range of 3.3 to 8.5. And that's because we've observed about 6,000 people have submitted their data to Blaine Bettinger. And he's put together a very, very nice table of the estimate and the range that you'd expect of shared DNA for a variety of different relationships.
Why don't siblings have 100% DNA?
It's because of the genetic lottery. Because when your father passes on his DNA, he only passes on half of his DNA, and your mother only passes on half of her DNA, so that when you make half and half, you have a whole. You know, if your father passed on all of his DNA and your mother passed on all of her DNA, you'd have twice the amount of DNA in total than your parents. And then your children,
half each time.
so it's half each time, it's cut in half. And so, for example, your brother might have inherited chromosome 13579 from your father, but you might have inherited chromosome 246810. Again, it's like shuffling a deck of cards. It's a genetic lottery. It's pure luck whether you are passed on the same bit of DNA that your brother was passed on. Because every time your father has a child, or your mother has a child, the deck of cards gets reshuffled and just gets dealt out again. And it is really a genetic lottery.
Barry down the back.
So sometimes when you do the test, you don't just do one lot of tests. You may have to retest for different situations. So in that instance, if you were targeting somebody, you would test a male and a male on a line to match. So you could be indefinitely doing some of those tests. There's no, like, you can't just do your Y, your autosomal, and your other one, and then you're sorted forever. You may have to keep doing tests to clarify relationship.
Well, once you get into it, it's great fun.
No, it's absolutely true. I've tested 11 members of my family. Patty, how many members of your family have you tested?
Only 4 so far.
Okay, so you're absolutely right. If you could just do yourself, and then send your sample in. They'll keep your sample for 25 years in the lab, and it'll be good for most tests over the next 3 to 4 years. And you can have subsequent tests done. You don't need to swab again. But once you have been tested, your results are going to sit in the database forever, or until you say, I want to take them off completely. And therefore, it's like an investment. You do your DNA now, today, you'll still be getting matches next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. So it is an investment in your future genealogy research as well. But if there are certain situations, and say for example, like this lady here said, you wanted to explore a specific question in your tree. Is that crowd over there related to our crowd over here? That's a situation where you would have to do targeted testing. And so that's what I did with my dad and these cousins in Australia. My dad had already tested in 2009, and I found the cousins in Australia, or these potential cousins in Australia, in 2012, I think it was. They did the test, and I paid for it. My dad had already been tested, and when the results came back, then it did show that they were indeed second cousins, as I had anticipated. So it very, very much depends on what questions you want answered. My advice would be, if your parents are still alive, test both of them. You could test yourself if you wanted to, but I think you're going to get most value for money if you test both of your parents. If your parents are not alive, then the oldest person on that side of the family would be a useful proxy, because the older people tend to have much more matches than the younger generations, just because they're that further back, and because they tend to have much more concentrated shared DNA with people who have tested in the database. And because a lot of them are Irish American, for example, when would the members of your family, when would they have emigrated? Early 1900s? Late 1800s? Maybe the 1860s? Or during the famine? So what kind of connection would you be expecting with Irish American cousins living today? You know, if it's the turn of the century, 1900, they're maybe second cousins, if you were born around about 1950. But if you were born about 1930, they might even be first cousins. So it very, very much depends on what you're expecting, and you will be informed by your own family tree research what you will expect. Certainly, I have found it very useful connecting with American cousins, because even though the records for my direct line run out at 1830, I can go across the cousins in America, and their line goes back to 1800. And so by inference, I can also go back to 1800 because of that. So it can be extremely useful to connect with Irish American cousins. Any other questions? Yeah, lady here.
No, I did do a test 3 years ago, I'm not sure, but I couldn't find it today. But if I did find them, could I go into one of the free websites and upload them
Yes.
and get into that link or whatever?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely.
Goes for everybody.
If it was done 3 years ago, then even 23andMe would be possible.
What company was it? Was it National Geographic, or was it one of the companies we talked about? Ancestry by DNA.
Right. I think that's one of the.
I just read today there's a trademark case being taken by Ancestry DNA against Ancestry by DNA for a breach of trademark. Maybe Morris knows more than I do about
No, I don't.
who you can move that data to.
I've no idea, I'm afraid. I'm not even sure what I suspect that they might even do CODIS markers rather than autosomal SNPs. Let's have a look at that brochure afterwards, and let's have a little chat, and I'll see if there's something that we could do with your DNA and get it uploaded to somewhere anyway. If it is a particular type of data, autosomal SNP data, then there's a possibility that we could upload it to GetMatch. But it could be difficult. It could be difficult. But I'll have a look at the brochure and see what we can do. There's a question over there, and there's 2 questions here as well.
Declan first.
If you decide to get the autosomal package, do you have to retest or to get to do the X DNA and the Y DNA later, or what way does that work? Is there one package?
One package does all. You can. The lab will actually store your sample. And what they'll do is they will just take out whatever amount of DNA they need for the particular test that you're ordering. And the sample is good for at least 3 to 4 years. So you've got 3 to 4 years to use that sample for any number of tests that you might want to do.
Is there a deal for all three tests together?
Just the addition of those special offers. So you don't get anything else. For all 3.
Buy 2, get 1 free now.
I wish. But I wouldn't get all 3. I would actually dip your toe in the water to start off with. And either by the YDNA or the family finder or autosomal DNA, because that's going to give you your best value.
you will find most matches if you do the family finder test. But if you're particularly interested in a surname and you want to research your surname, then the YDNA test would be the best one to do for that. There were two other questions. Did I do that here?
I'll volunteer.
Just a query on mitochondrial DNA. If you're a female and you only have sons, does the mitochondrial DNA end with you?
No, it goes down to your sons and stops there.
Oh, it doesn't go beyond that?
No.
Okay.
Right, again.
Just for on behalf of overseas
Sure.
people who are not here tonight, if they want to go and do this, they're not here to get a test kit tonight, so they can go to any of the companies and then upload it to GetMatch. That's the best way for them to do that.
Yeah. Family Tree DNA at the moment is having a Christmas sale.
So the sale at the moment is not as good as the prices we have here tonight, but anybody that's listening overseas can take advantage of the Family Tree DNA sale up until December the 31st. So it's on for the next 6 to 7 weeks or so. Like I say, Ancestry, it depends where you are. If you're in America, Ancestry is much cheaper than if you're in Ireland or the UK. And I think the price for the Ancestry DNA test is $99 in the US. It's a little bit more than that. I think it's 125 Canadian dollars in Canada. And it's also available in Australia as well. But they only launched it in Canada and Australia and the UK and Ireland this year, around about March, April or so. So the number of non-US people in their database is really quite small. And like I said, even though you might get many more matches on Ancestry and 23andMe, I have found personally that despite the fact that I have more matches, I have more close matches on Family Tree DNA.
Anyone else? Okay, let me just conclude by thanking Maurice again for his usual excellent presentation. We give him a big round of applause. And I will remind you, next Thursday across the road in the parish centre, the launch of the book in Ennis Cathedral. The following Thursday, the 3rd of December, in the Ballynically Community Centre, is the launch of the book on the parish of Ballynically and Izzy Casey. And we're back here in January with the talk on the O'Connell family. So thank you all for coming tonight. How many people want to swap here and now or take a test away for a male relative? So we've about 10. So we'll just set some chairs around the table here and you can come up and sit down. We'll go through the paperwork with you. So thank you all very much for coming.
Turn off this.
Get rid of that, and I thought I was recording. Screen Recorder Pro, where is that? Oh, strange. Oh. Sorry, I'll just quit this and I'll take that out and that'll help. Ah, there we go.